In the shadowed corners of New York's underworld, they spoke Vincent Serrano's name the way people speak of weather they cannot stop, quietly, and only when they were certain no one else was listening. He was 34, the undisputed head of the Serrano syndicate, a criminal empire threading itself through Red Hook's shipping terminals, Lower Manhattan real estate, and a dozen other trades that never appeared on any ledger. Dark-eyed, lean-jawed, the kind of man who wore bespoke wool like a second skin. But none of that is what they talked about when they talked about Vincent Serrano. What they talked about was his absolute refusal to let anyone close. Heiresses had tried. Daughters of allied bosses had presented themselves at his door. He turned every one of them away with the same polite, immovable frost, a man who had decided long ago that affection was a form of debt he could not afford to carry. His one indulgence, his one visible vulnerability, was a platinum pocket watch that had belonged to his younger brother, Marco, gunned down 3 years prior in a parking garage in Hoboken. The watch was not merely grief-made metal. Soldered into its false back was a micro USB drive encrypted with a 64-character key. On that drive, the shell company architecture, the offshore trust routing numbers, and the emergency contact protocols for $280 million hidden in a black account in the Caymans. The Serrano syndicate's entire financial skeleton, compressed to the size of a thumbnail. Vincent wore it on a platinum chain beneath his shirt, against his chest every day. Until the night he didn't. Delaney Wick was 28, and she was exhausted in the particular way that only nurses understand, the kind of tired that lives in the back of your knees and behind your eyes and doesn't leave even after sleep. She had been pulling 12-hour nights at Bellevue for 3 years, ever since she returned from 18 months with Doctors Without Borders in South Sudan. She knew how to pack a sucking chest wound with her bare hands. She knew how to make a tourniquet out of a shoelace and a pen. She knew a lot of things that had no use in a normal life, and she lived a very normal life, mostly. Her apartment in Kensington, Brooklyn, was small and clean. She owed $87,000 in nursing school loans. Her younger brother, Cade, had aplastic anemia and had been waiting 14 months for a bone marrow match that still hadn't come. She worked nights so she could be awake during the day to take his calls and drive him to his transfusions. She wasn't supposed to be the one who saved the world. She just kept showing up. On a wet Thursday in November, at 2:17 in the morning, paramedics rolled in a GSW victim who had been found in an alley off Water Street. Male, mid-40s. 3 rounds in the torso, no ID. Delaney was the charge nurse on duty. She ran the resuscitation for 41 minutes before the attending called time of death. In the chaos of the trauma bay, as the team cleared the body, Delaney found a platinum pocket watch on the floor near the gurney. It must have slipped from the man's coat pocket when they stripped him. She picked it up, cold, heavy, old. She set it on the counter, planning to log it with personal effects. But the inventory rush hit. 2 more traumas rolled in simultaneously. And when her shift ended at 6:15, the watch was still sitting in the deep pocket of her scrub top, where she'd tucked it to keep it safe. She didn't realize it until she was home, pulling off her jacket. She sat down on the edge of her bed and examined it properly in the morning light. Platinum case, the patina of something genuinely old. On the back, an engraving in Italian. Per Marco. Sempre. For Marco. Always. She turned it over. The clasp on the back panel didn't sit quite flush. She pressed it gently and the false back released, revealing a slim cavity. Inside, a USB drive no bigger than her thumbnail, matte black, taped in place with surgical precision. Delaney closed the panel and sat very still for a long moment. She thought about turning it into the hospital, lost and found. She thought about taking it to the police. She thought about the man who had died on her table. 3 bullets in him found in an alley with no ID. She made her decision the way she made most of her decisions, practically without theater. She would find out who it belonged to and return it. There was a coin and jewelry dealer on Atlantic Avenue, a man named Gil Farrow, who had been operating out of the same narrow shop for 30 years. He dealt in estate pieces, no questions. If anyone could identify the maker and trace the provenance, it was him. Delaney walked in at 9:15. She set the watch on the glass counter and said she was trying to find the owner. Gil Farrow was a compact man in his 60s with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead. He looked at the watch. He did not pick it up. He looked at it the way you look at something you have already decided not to touch. "Where did you get this?" he asked very quietly. "Someone left it at my workplace," Delaney said, which was close enough to true. "I'm trying to return it. Can you tell me who made it? There's an engraving." "I know who made it." Gil Farrow took a step back from the counter. Both of his hands went up, very slightly, as if the watch were pointing something at him. "And I know who owns it." Delaney waited. "That is a Serrano piece." His voice had dropped to something barely above a breath. "Vincent Serrano, you know that name?" She did, vaguely, the way you know the names of things in your city that you never go near. "If someone in his organization finds out you had this," Gil said, "they will not stop to ask questions first. They will assume you took it. They will assume you were looking for what's inside it." He shook his head. One short, firm movement. "I won't touch it. Don't bring it back here. There is only one thing you can do with that watch, and that is take it directly to him." Delaney left the shop with the watch back in her pocket and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, watching taxis move down Atlantic Avenue, her breath misting in the air. She could throw it in the East River. She had thought of that in the abstract, but if anyone had seen her at the hospital, security cameras in the trauma bay, the hallway, they already knew a face. She had nothing to bargain with if she let go of the watch. The only leverage she had was the thing itself. She drove to Red Hook. The Serrano compound occupied a converted waterfront warehouse, the kind of building that from the outside looked like it had been retrofitted into expensive loft space. The perimeter told a different story. Steel-reinforced fencing, guard posts disguised as utility structures. Two men in charcoal peacoats standing at the entrance lane, who were very clearly not security guards from any ordinary building. Delaney rolled down her window when they approached. The wind off the harbor was brutal. "I need to speak with Vincent Serrano," she said, and her voice only wavered slightly. "I have something of his." The taller of the two men looked at her the way you look at someone who has just done something genuinely baffling. "Mr. Serrano doesn't take walk-ins." Delaney reached into her pocket slowly, making sure they could see every movement, and placed the pocket watch flat on the window ledge. She said nothing else. She let the platinum speak. The tall man's eyes locked onto the watch. The dismissiveness left his face all at once, like a light being switched off. He turned away and murmured into his earpiece. The gate opened 40 seconds later. She was led into the building, searched by a woman in a dark suit who moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times, and taken to an office on the 3rd floor. The room smelled like black coffee and cedar, and the faint electrical tangs of server equipment running behind the walls. A bank of monitors displayed the compound's exterior feeds. A fire burned in a wide, low hearth. Vincent Serrano was standing at the far window, looking out over the harbor. When he turned, Delaney understood immediately why the name carried the weight it did. He was tall, dark-eyed, and composed with a stillness that felt less like calm and more like compression, like something held at enormous pressure behind glass. His gaze moved over her with the speed and thoroughness of a man who catalogued things for a living, and what he saw was clearly not what he had expected. "My associate tells me you have my property," he said. His voice was low and measured. Delaney stepped forward and placed the pocket watch on the edge of his desk. She did not extend her hand. She kept her posture straight because she was afraid, and because the only thing she had ever found that helped with fear was standing like you weren't feeling it. "A patient brought into my ER last night," she said. "He didn't make it. The watch was in his coat pocket. I realized this morning it wasn't something I should turn into a lost and found." Vincent stepped to the desk. He picked up the watch without touching her hand. He ran his thumb over the case, the Italian engraving on the back, and when he opened the false panel and confirmed the USB drive was undisturbed, something moved across his face. Not relief exactly. Something deeper and quieter than that. He looked back at her. "You went to Gil Farrow," he said. Delaney blinked. Of course, he already knew. He wouldn't touch it. He told me to come to you. And you did. He studied her with the same precision as before, but something in the quality of the attention had shifted. Most people would have thrown it in the river. I considered it, she said honestly. I decided that was worse. Why worse? Because whoever shot your man did it to get this. If I'd destroyed it, they'd have lost their leverage, and I'd have no proof I didn't still have it. She paused. It seemed safer to return it directly. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he set the watch down on the desk and crossed to a laptop on the sideboard. He turned the screen toward her. It was a still frame from a surveillance camera. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., the location, the trauma bay at Bellevue, and there, was a woman in blue scrubs with the pocket watch in her hand. The Caruso family, Vincent said, has a contact inside the hospital's security contractor. That image was pulled this morning. He tapped the screen. They pulled your badge next. Delaney Wick, charge nurse, night shift. They have your home address. Your brother's medical records are not hard to find through the same channels. He said it without emphasis, which somehow made it worse. They know you came to Farrow. By tonight, they will know you came here. The floor did not drop, but it felt like it did. I returned it, Delaney said carefully. I didn't take it. I didn't open the drive. I have nothing they want. You have information confirming I have the watch. That makes you a liability to them. He held her gaze. If you go back to your apartment tonight, you will not be safe. The Carusos don't leave witnesses to their complications. Then help me leave the city. The words came out before she could organize them better. Give me enough to get Cade somewhere safe and I'll disappear. I don't want anything from you. I just want. You can't run, Vincent said. Not unkindly, but with a finality that left no seam to argue with. They have your brother's medical records. They know his condition. They know he can't travel easily. And they know that if they find him first, you'll surface. He straightened. The only viable option is to bring both of you here inside this perimeter until I resolve the Caruso situation. Delaney stared at him. You're asking me to move into a crime lord's compound. I'm telling you, it's the option that keeps you and your brother alive. He moved to the door and spoke briefly in Italian to the man outside. Then he looked back at her. Your quarters will be on the second floor. Leone will arrange transport for your brother tomorrow morning. She wanted to argue. She wanted to say she was a nurse, she solved problems, she did not hide in fortresses. But the surveillance still image was still on the screen, and her home address was already in someone else's hands, and Cade had a transfusion scheduled for Tuesday and couldn't afford even a disruption in his care, let alone a threat to his life. She said, I want to be clear that I'm not here as a guest. I'm here because you've left me no choice. Something that might have been the ghost of respect moved through Vincent Serrano's expression. Noted, he said. For 4 days, she barely saw him. The compound ran with the quiet precision of something that had been engineered not to need visible oversight. Delaney read medical journals in her room, video called Cade, and tried to calibrate her fear against the fact that nothing dangerous actually happened to her here. It was Cade who made her laugh. He took one look at the room she'd filmed for him on her phone and said, "Dee, I've been waiting my whole life for you to accidentally stumble into a thriller." On the 5th evening, Vincent knocked on her door. He had a folder in one hand. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, and the ease of it, the small human erosion of the armor, was almost more disarming than the rest of him had been. "May I come in?" She nodded. He set the folder on the coffee table and remained standing, which she had come to understand was simply how he existed in rooms, never quite settling, always at the edge of motion. "My team ran a background check," he said. "Necessary precaution. I needed to confirm you weren't placed by the Carusos." And you are exactly who you say you are. He tapped the folder. An error nurse making $41,000 a year after taxes, carrying $87,000 in student loan debt, supporting a younger brother in active treatment for aplastic anemia. A pause. The transplant he needs. I know someone at Memorial Sloan Kettering who runs their bone marrow registry. There is a match on the national list that his current insurance classification has denied as experimental. My foundation can classify the procedure differently. Delaney stood up. The folder sat between them like something she didn't want to touch. I didn't return your watch for payment, she said. I know that. Then stop. It's not payment. His voice dropped slightly, losing its boardroom precision. You walked into my office with my brother's watch. You could have sold the contents of that drive to the Carusos for more money than you will see in a decade of nursing. You came here instead, alone in a car I am fairly certain needs new brake pads, and you handed it back. He held her gaze. Covering a transplant procedure is not a transaction. It is the only proportional response I have. Delaney looked at the folder. She thought about Cade's voice on the phone, tired and steady, and trying not to ask her for anything he thought she couldn't give. She thought about 14 months on a wait list. If I take this, she said slowly, I need it to be because it's right for him, not because it creates some obligation between us. It creates no obligation, Vincent said. You already gave me everything I would have asked for. That was the sentence she wasn't prepared for. She looked at him, really looked, and underneath the compression she had catalogued that first day, she found something she hadn't expected. A man carrying something heavy, quietly, who had spent years building walls because he'd learned what happened when they came down. She didn't say anything. She picked up the folder. The Caruso attack came at 4 a.m, 9 days later. The first explosion hit the loading dock level, and Delaney was awake and on her feet before the second one registered, because she had spent 18 months in conflict zones, and her nervous system had never fully unlearned what a structural breach sounded like. Vincent was already at her door. He had a sidearm and a look in his eyes that was all concentration, no panic. We move now, he said. Leon is holding the ground floor. There's a reinforced room behind the server bank. Go. She went. They moved through corridors with gunfire erupting below them, and Delaney didn't let herself think about anything except the next door. The next turn, Vincent's shoulders ahead of her as they navigated toward the server room. She had learned in South Sudan that fear didn't go away under fire. You just got very good at filing it somewhere you couldn't hear it. They were 20 feet from the reinforced door when a shooter came through a window on the far side of the hall. Vincent shoved her behind him and fired twice. The shooter went down, but managed to discharge his weapon as he fell. The round caught Vincent in the upper left arm. She heard the impact before she saw it, the hollow sound of a bullet finding muscle rather than bone. He got the door open. They went through, the locks engaged. Delaney turned on the overhead light and saw the blood before he said anything. Sit down, she said. She was already moving to the emergency cabinet, mounted on the wall. It's not deep. I've heard that from people who were bleeding out. Sit down, Mr. Serrano. He sat. She cut the shirt sleeve away with the medical shears from the cabinet and assessed the wound in under 10 seconds. Through and through, lateral deltoid, no arterial involvement. Serious but survivable if managed properly. She had done this with worse light, worse equipment, and patients who were actively in the middle of being shot at. She packed the entry wound, applied direct pressure with both hands, and felt him tense against the pain. Talk, she said, it helps the time pass. He said nothing for a moment. Then, looking at the ceiling, rather than at her, my brother had this compound built, Marco. He was the one who thought about contingencies. I was the one who executed them. He died because I was 40 minutes late to a meeting and he went in without backup. Delaney kept steady pressure on the wound. She didn't say she was sorry. She had learned that sorry was sometimes the least useful thing you could offer. The watch was his, she said. He left it in my office the day before he died. He was always forgetting it. I kept it because... He stopped, started again. I kept it because it was his voice in the room. Every decision I made, I felt like I could look at it and hear him arguing with me. The sound of gunfire outside was growing intermittent, then sparse. Leone's voice came through the intercom. Controlled Italian signaling ground secured. Delaney began wrapping the wound. Her hands were steady. His breathing had slowed. "You haven't shaken once," Vincent said, watching her work. "I shook for the first 3 months in South Sudan," she said. "Eventually you run out of adrenaline, and you're just left with the problem in front of you." He was quiet for a long moment. "What you did tonight," he said finally. "You could have let me manage the wound myself. You didn't. You were losing blood, and you would have done it wrong." "Probably." His dark eyes found hers in the flat light of the safe room. "I have spent 3 years keeping every person at arm's length because the last one I let close died because of me. I decided that was the only logical conclusion. That proximity to me was the risk variable." He paused. "You returned my brother's watch. You came into this compound against every reasonable instinct. You just kept me from bleeding out in a server room, and at no point have you asked me for anything." Delaney tied off the bandage and sat back. Her knees were on the concrete floor. "I asked you to let me go home. You asked me to keep you and your brother safe. That's not asking for anything. That's asking me to be worth something." He reached into his shirt pocket with his uninjured arm and drew out the pocket watch. He had been carrying it on him, she realized, the entire time. He turned it once in his palm. Then he reached out and placed it in her hand. Not a gesture, a transfer, deliberate, complete. "Marco would have liked you," he said. "He had no patience for people who performed. He only ever trusted people who just did the thing." His fingers closed briefly over hers, warm against the cold platinum. "The watch stays with you, Delaney, until this is over and you're free to go wherever you want to go." And after that he let the sentence rest there, unfinished, which was more honest than anything else he could have said. The tears came before she could stop them, not for fear, which had mostly resolved, but for the strangeness of the moment. The weight of the watch in her palm, the smell of blood and concrete and the faint cedar she had come to associate with this man, the way the world had changed shapes in 9 days. She didn't hand it back. Cade's transplant was scheduled 6 weeks later at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Delaney sat in the waiting room for 7 hours in the grey January light, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of terrible hospital coffee. At the 4-hour mark, Vincent appeared in the doorway, coat, no tie, looking slightly out of place in the fluorescent lighting of a public hospital corridor in a way that she found absurdly reassuring. He sat down beside her without asking. He didn't say anything for a long time. She didn't ask him to. At hour 7, the surgeon came out with the look on his face that Delaney, as a medical professional, could read before he spoke. And it was the right look, the good one, the look that meant the hard part was done and the next chapter could begin. She exhaled a breath she had been holding for 14 months. When she looked sideways at Vincent, his eyes were on the surgeon, and his jaw was set, and there was something around his eyes that wasn't quite as composed as he usually managed. In her coat pocket, the pocket watch was warm from her body heat. She thought of Marco, who had built contingency into everything and died 40 minutes early. She thought of Gil Farrow backing away from his own counter. She thought of a November night in a trauma bay, a man who couldn't tell her his name, and a false-bottomed watch that had landed her in the strangest life she had never planned. She thought that contingency, after all, worked both ways. She reached into her pocket and her fingers closed around the watch. She didn't take it out. She just held it there, in the warmth between her palm and the cold platinum, and let herself believe that some things that slip away in the dark find exactly the hands they were meant to reach.